This talk is Happy Holidays from Renzik. Basically what happened this past year in Autopsy while you guys were not paying attention as part of this. This is Renzik. He's decked out for the holidays. This is basically our holiday card that we are sending out to you. Quick note about our dogs. A couple years ago we had a slide and people found the most insightful part of the conference of these dogs. Renzik is the guy on the left. Forensic. We aren't quite sure what dog he is. We think he's a Doberman. We think he's a Rottweiler. We aren't entirely sure. Hash is the bloodhound on the right. More associated with Sleuth Kit, probably from 18 years ago. But these are our dogs, Renzik and Hash. All right, so what is Autopsy? For those who have never heard of Autopsy or still associate Autopsy with the version that I made 18 years ago that was Linux and Mac and command line and a terrible web interface before there were cool web interfaces. Basically, Autopsy is an open source digital forensics platform. A lot of those same great goals that Eric was talking about were kind of similar goals that we had 10 years ago of rebuilding Autopsy as kind of a platform, a standard way to have modules, standardized formats, a way of storing things, standardized UI of things. So to us, it's always been a platform for the past 8 or 9 years. Main goal is ease of use and extensibility. Early on, we had some funding from Army to kind of provide kits out in the battlefield where they had 2 hours, bullets flying, 18 jobs to do, and that's really kind of shaped from day one of version 3 of like ease of use and automation and few clicks as possible and making consistent workflow as part of that. Basic idea, hard drives, media cards, smartphone formats, support all those things. If you've never tried it before, it's got all the basic standard features you want in a forensics tool and a whole bunch of other unique things that we'll kind of touch on today. But there's an intro to Autopsy talk this afternoon in the Autopsy track that will kind of dive into more details on the basics. Today we're going to focus, right now we're going to focus much more on what's new in the past year. To do that, I'm going to walk through a kind of a workflow of using Autopsy and point out kind of what's new and changed in the past year. So, step one, you make a case. You give it a folder name, you give it a case name. Not much has changed here. This is the same screenshot you saw a year ago. You choose between a single user and multi-user case. Single user case is on your desktop, SQLite, self-contained, one-off investigator. Multi-user is collaborative, central database, central text indexing server, kind of multi-user cases. The one change on there is we improved the documentation and kind of test buttons on there. Some folks who are setting up the clusters for multi-user cases, it's actually pretty simple, but it can get kind of tricky with permissions in Solar services and database services and whether it's running as a service account versus a user account. Just some kind of minor challenges there with permissions. So there is kind of a test button now that gives more of a better diagnostics to help you isolate, why there's some permission problems and having some case opening errors. But otherwise, it's pretty easy to get set up. Step 2, make a case. Step 2, you add a data source. Data source is our name for disk image, logical files, sets, local disk, whatever. There's a new option at the bottom. It's called the Autopsy Logical Imager. This is a new tool. It's a command line tool that runs on target computer, collects a bunch of data. It's not nearly as smart as some stuff Eric was talking about, but the basic idea here is you have a bunch of rules. It collects files based on file names, extensions, folders, and does some registry parsing inside of that to pull out things like users and basic OS info. So not as quite as big into kind of shell bags and movie cache and all those kinds of things, but much more on basic collecting files of interest and doing some registry parsing using our registry library, which is based off of Willi's old Python registry library, but that is on our repo. It's a C++ library for registry things. Unique benefits. Like Eric was talking about as well, we're using the Sleuth Kit for this collection, so we bypass the OS, that we can get access to the locked files and bypass rootkits and such on there. It won't update timestamps as we're scanning through because we aren't actually using the OS to access the files. If there's a dual boot system, if there's both Windows and Linux partitions, we'll get the Linux ones. If you're in Windows, we're scanning everything because they're going low-level raw access to the drives. And the other cool thing, which if you've seen our triage talks in the past years, we have this feature where basically we make a VHD image as we analyze this. Eric's talking about a VHD image where he copies things into a VHD. Our VHD is actually, as we read sector 5 from that disk to parse it, we save it as sector 5 in the VHD. And the VHD becomes basically a sparse image of that data you're analyzing. We're using that same technology as part of the logical imager, and so you keep your imager plugged in after you've copied all of your Word documents or PDF files or JPEGs on there, and you keep it plugged in, it'll keep on copying. And the longer you keep it in, the more data you get. So you can kind of prioritize this stuff. If I really care about pictures or documents or whatever on the desktop, limited time. But oh look, I have 10 more minutes. Keep it plugged in. You'll get 10 minutes more of data until you actually rip it out. So Anne has a talk about that later on. I believe this track, maybe the other track. But there's a talk this afternoon on 35 minutes on kind of more how to use this in what is behind the scenes. Next step, after you've added your data source in, configure ingest modules. Ingest modules are our modules, plugin modules. You'll see a bunch of the competition a little bit later on. They do the analysis on that data to help you find various things. They parse file formats. They find things. So it's a couple of updates on the past year. You probably can't read them from afar. The intro talk this afternoon will go down the whole list here to find out what they're doing. But here's some changes. Recent activity module. It's basically focused on pulling out things of user activity on the system and showing them to you in various ways. As many of you may know, we have a contract with DHS S&T to focus on building features for law enforcement and make them available as free open source features. So as part of that work, a whole bunch of these were added in, and some others we couldn't fit in the slide. All of these came out of the What's Needed talk. You'll see in the agenda before lunch, we have a time slot to kind of collect requirements and feedback on things that you guys feel like are missing and want on that. So all these things came from those surveys and things in the past that we listened to you guys and got them pushed back in. So more web support, Safari and Edge are now in there for support, in addition to what we had before, which is IE and Chrome and Firefox. We expanded Firefox and Chrome to get form fills, for addresses and all the autofill fields, Chrome parsing of Chrome cache data. That slows it down a bit, but it provides some pretty powerful stuff. Zone identifiers are now being parsed to give you more context on where a file came from. And then we ported a bunch of third-party modules over. They happen to all be Mark's modules, but what we did was we had a Twitter crowdsourcing like we always do of, hey, what modules did you guys use the most? Bring those back in, and they're now kind of part of the main distribution. In many cases, we actually ended up kind of rewriting them just because they were Python. There was a bit easier we could do by leveraging recent activity, and they're in Java. So it was basically kind of some rewritings of what Mark did in Python, but in Java. So there's a recycle bin module now. It'll find the recycle bin entries. It makes artifacts for them. Artifacts are our way of generically storing data, kind of like Eric was talking about, of kind of grouping the event logs into a certain type. We call them artifacts in our system, but it also makes a deleted entry back at that path, right? So you delete a file in the recycle bin, it moves to the recycle bin. We're also making a deleted path back where it was before, so you can see that entry for there. Shellbags is in there. We're actually using Registry for output as part of that, and more user data. We had some basic user data in there before. We're doing more of the SAM Hive and Registry for output to give you more context on there. Plaso is now a module. This has been a request for a while, so we'll see a bit later on. There's a bunch of timeline infrastructure changes. You can now run Plaso on there. We run all those, we pull the events out, and they get turned into our timeline database and shown in our timeline if an analysis. Email module, we added support for EML. Again, this is based on Mark's module and some, I think it's a Tika library on that, as well as vCards. So kind of rounding out more on the communication side of data on there. The correlation engine module. This module is all about helping you make connections in your current case and in past cases. So we have this concept of the central repository, which is a database, and you can configure it to store every hash file you've ever seen, every email address you've seen, every phone number you've seen. We basically allows you to kind of find connections with your past cases, get some intelligence out of there, and correlate within your current case between devices. So in the past year, we've basically expanded out the things that we map between. So SSIDs for Wi-Fi access points, MAC addresses, IMEIs, ISSIDs, IMSIs, those all get mapped through. So we'll save those things, and if you find the same phone being used in multiple cases, you can make that connection if you didn't know that connection was there before, or Wi-Fi access points. Android Analyzer has been a module it needed some love over the years. So this module's main job is to focus on apps and databases on Android devices. We support YAS2, EX24, HFS for iOS, that data, but there wasn't as many modules focused on the app databases for modules. So the past year, there's a bunch of effort on getting more data in there. So browsers, and there's now support for the Android browser, Opera and Samsung, Facebook, Emo, Line, Skype, TextNow, Viper, WhatsApp, some sharing apps. There's a lot more app support in there, and there's more coming. We've also made it easier to write modules. It wasn't that hard to write modules before, honestly. Danny and Raman are giving a talk this afternoon more about this, but basically before was we had a text file, it's a Python file, you copy and paste it, you put a database name in, some queries and various things. We've kind of simplified it even more, so it's now kind of a 3-step process. We have a method that basically says, this is the database name I want. We go through 4 or 5 steps to find it for you and give it back to you. You query for the tables you care about. And then before you had to kind of do some work to go through our artifacts and attributes. We have like 50 artifact types, 100 attribute types. These are how we store data generically to merge together different event log types, for example, or browser types together. You had to hunt around and kind of find out which one was there that was relevant for you. We now make it easy. There's kind of an add contacts method where you put the name and the phone number and the email address, and we do all the stuff behind the scenes to make it easier for you. So go see talk this afternoon if you're writing apps, parsers. Go see Danny Raman's talk this afternoon with more details on that. So once you configure your modules, they go off of some background threads, parallelizing the background, do some analysis, results start popping up. Here's the basic case UI. There's a tree on the left-hand side, there's a table on the right, and the viewer on the bottom. Basic flow here, not rocket science. You start in the tree. You can always find everything we make in the tree, and you kind of work your way around in the UI. So given that, some other changes. On the table on the left-hand side here, up over here above Renzik, there's been a theme for the past year on kind of performance, right? The data sets are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Sometimes you click on the wrong node of the tree. It's got 60,000 items in there. There's only so much you can do with 60,000 items, right? And then you realize, oh, I should not have pressed that. It's now going to hang for a while while it all loads. So there's been a big theme of how we identify these things and reduce that bottleneck and kind of figure these things out. So there's been a bunch of different queries and things we did to make things load faster, more lazily, or whatever. But one noticeable change is there's now paging everywhere. So every now time in the table, there's always paging involved. So if you click on that node by accident that had 100,000 items in there, we'll only show you 10,000. And then you can kind of page through there. Sorting is now kind of a bit awkward because it's now only sorting within that one page. We're working on that. This is kind of the first step at kind of not making you regret too much. Because honestly, 60,000 items is a lot of items. It's probably not that useful anyway. So there's other things that we're working on, but you'll now see paging everywhere. Content viewers, these are the guys on the lower right-hand corner. Once you pick a file, how you view this. A bunch of things have been added in here. So Willi Ballantyne, I think the first ever OSDFCon Autopsy module challenge, probably 5 or 6, 7 years ago, submitted some modules. This is one of the most popular ones of all time, I think, which is the Registry viewer. So once you click on a hive, it allows you to navigate that hive down there. This has now been fully merged in to the actual application. So there's a bunch of tabs on the top there. Application is one of them. The application tab is all about file type specific things. It's where you see a picture, if it's a picture, watch a movie, it's a movie, or if it's a registry hive, you can now navigate that hive and poke through and go all the key value pairs. Other new feature, on the application tab as well, images can now have tags. So if you're investigating sloths, and that's a good face you want to have some facial recognition software figure out. When you tag a picture, you can draw boxes around it to highlight what you think is relevant in that picture. We're not modifying the picture. We're just kind of saving an overlay of where you drew the box and as many boxes as you have. So that's getting saved in the database. You can move them around, you can delete them, you can do all that kind of stuff. There is a button that allows you to save the image with the tag on it if you want to. When you make a report, we'll give you 2 copies of it. We'll give you a copy of the picture with the box and a copy of the box. So it's kind of a cool thing to do that if you guys are tagging things and want to call it to someone. This is why I tagged this picture. You can call that out. Other viewers, there's now an HTML viewer on the application one. Before, HTML was kind of hokey, so we now have a proper viewer on there. It's updated a couple times this past year, actually, so that makes it easier to see what's on a web page. The other Occurrences viewer down in the bottom right-hand corner. So this viewer is focused on showing you where else a file has been seen before, or an artifact, a bookmark, a URL, phone number, whatever it is. So the other Occurrences basically goes to that central repository I mentioned before, that database we're always maintaining of things we've seen before, and it shows you what cases you've seen that before, or in the current case, who else has it. This viewer was there last year. The basic change here is layout. So it's now kind of let's cut off on this screen. Let's go to that screen. There's 4 columns basically. First column is all about cases. Second is data source. Third is path. Before it was basically just a table with 1 row per occurrence. So it made it harder to skim through and realize what case names you can see before. Now you can quickly skim through and see case names. Oh, that one's interesting, click on that, and then kind of dive down for more details. There's a translation viewer now. So we kind of rearranged the tabs down the bottom. There's now a proper text tab that merges together everything associated with text, whether it's just strings output, whether it's a proper kind of extraction from PDF or doc files. And there's now a translation tab that basically will translate from whatever language to English as the default, but you can target any other language. It requires Google or Microsoft APIs. So you have to go to the Google Translate API or Google Bing or Microsoft Bing and get their keys. You plug the keys in, and then we'll kind of submit queries through that. It requires you to be online, right? This requires going to servers at Google or Microsoft. So if you're air-gapped, it's not going to work for you unless you have your own on-premise version. But this is the basic idea for that. File names too get translated. So the bottom, this was all about that viewer on the right-hand corner about getting translations. If you have file names and folder names that are also in a language you don't speak, we'll translate those as well. So here's an example here of the table. The left-hand column has now been translated to English, but you can see there the second column was the original name. So these are actual countries in this case, in their native script. But we'll actually translate that, so you can actually see them in real time of what names you're looking at. Other viewers, so these are all about kind of the three-pane view of Autopsy, the tree, the table, the viewers. There's some things, we like that UI because it's simple, it's intuitive, and our goal is to be an extensible general framework so we can support any data type that you can imagine. And it's always great to see the module competitions of ways that people come up with data they want to parse and analyze, and because we're so generic with it, we can show it and store it, it's great. But sometimes you need something more specific, right? The generic is too generic, and it's hard to go through data. So we have three specialized viewers as well. Those got some love this past year as well. We have Timeline, Image Gallery, and Communications. So Timeline is a viewer all about viewing events. Here's one view as a bar chart. There's another view we have, which is more of a sequential clustered view. There's a list view. The talk this afternoon goes in more detail, but this is the basic idea of the Timeline UI. The big changes this past year were really core infrastructure. So for those who's used Timeline in the past, the first time you launched it, there was somewhat of a kind of lengthy process, a couple minutes, where it would go to the database, pull the timestamps out. It only knew about timestamps that we created. So we make artifacts for web history or EXIF for various things, and it would know about those artifacts and know that EXIF and web bookmarks may have timestamps and pull that data in. But it would sit there for a couple minutes, querying it in, making a database, and then fire up, and you could see that. If you're in a multi-user case with your colleagues in a lab and the same things, you'd all do the same process. It was saved locally, so it happened for all of you. So the big change this past year is moving that to the central database and making Timeline and eventing be kind of a first-class citizen. So now when you add a data source to the case or make artifacts, it's automatically updating the events table in the central database. So if you're in a multi-user lab, you all see the same database. You're not making your own copy of this. The other benefit is that as a module developer, you can push those events in there now. It's now smarter about what events. So when you make an artifact, it'll look for a timestamp automatically, or you can explicitly add it out, and it's not just our hard-coded events that will be shown in there. So makes it much more powerful. Again, this is all part of our DHS S&T work. They've been funding this work for a couple years, and this is kind of part of that work as well. UI-wise, it's the exact same thing. So there's no UI changes for Timeline users. It's really just kind of back-end, core infrastructure. The only difference is you won't watch it sit there for a couple minutes making the database. Communications UI, we launched this last year at OSDFCon, showing kind of this focus on better ways of showing messaging and app data in the application. So this is the main UI. Filters on the left-hand side to filter by account type or devices or date ranges. Middle column is all about the accounts, email addresses, Twitter IDs, phone numbers, whatever they are. Accounts, you can sort them by number of messages or other information, and then you choose that, and then the right-hand side shows you the messages or call logs or contacts, for that given account. Changes that, there's a bunch of UI changes this past year on that. Emails and messages are now organized by thread. So many apps actually organize things by thread automatically, so we're just using that thread ID. But we also added in threading algorithms, if you will, for email. So if you have a PSD or an MBOX or EML message, we'll actually go through and try and thread them together using some, industry standard algorithms from like, I don't know, the 90s actually, but nothing has really changed in threading. It's all about replies and froms and message IDs. There's all of that in there, so those all get grouped together, so it's easier to go through a large inbox with a whole bunch of messages. It's already kind of grouped together for that. So there's that back end. On the UI side, on the right-hand side there, if we go over here on the right-hand side, there's now a bunch more tabs on there. So one is a summary, which gives you high-level information on how many messages this account has, how many contact book entries that account has associated with it, where it's been seen before. If you have the essential repo enabled, we'll show you this account was also seen on devices X, Y, and Z to kind of give you that correlation view as part of that. There's a proper contact book entry now. This kind of better displays contact book entries. It makes it easier to find image and video attachments. So right now you can click on an account, click on the attachments tab, and it will show you all the attachments that person has sent back and forth with your wherever you have the data from. So here's an example on this again. We're limited time here, but it's an example now of a contact book entry. We'll give you kind of more of the details on that person and their picture, their V card if they have it. Common property search. So this is a feature that has not been that, honestly, widely advertised, but the basic idea here is it uses this central repository, again, this back-end database storing things, to help you find connections with past cases or within your current case. So the main updates this past year were actually on display. No one really else had this feature. We had this idea of like, this seems useful. We're not entirely sure how to use it and how to display things. But we're going to start somewhere. So it was basically, the first version was out there was kind of our initial kind of throwing a dart at the wall, and now we're kind of iterating on this of looking at real data and finding out how this becomes a useful feature. So the main things this past year were on kind of UI-wise of how we display things with common cases, with past cases, and again, being able to search those past cases as well. So you can now search your central repository for an email address or hash value or Wi-Fi SSID to kind of do your own manual searching there. But here's an example of how we now group together past case searches. So this is a use case where you have a case open. You want to say, hey, I want to see how common this is with some other past case or what cases have in common with. So the grouping now is that top level, let's say, hey, this has got files in common with case ABC, and then we'll show you those files that were common. And you can do things like focus only on, I just care about pictures, I just care about documents, I just care about whatever to kind of filter that down. And you can also filter down based on occurrences. So if there's files that are really common, even if they aren't in the NSRL, we can use that data in the central repository to say, you know what, this is pretty common, a whole bunch of people have this, it's not worth correlating on, but basically a way to kind of map that up. If this is of interest to you guys, we always love feedback on this. Whenever I talk about correlation with different groups, some law enforcement groups, they're excited by it. Other law enforcement groups, it scares the crap out of them because they don't want to violate search warrants and various things, all these things. So we're always looking for kind of ideas and feedback on how this can kind of meet your needs without kind of concerning you too much with kind of matching cases that shouldn't be matched in various things. So if you have ideas and questions on this or are interested in this, let us know. And we can work that in next year's. Reporting. So last part of the process of the workflow here, we made a case, we had a data source, we analyzed some stuff, modules were going off behind the scenes, we tagged some things. We didn't talk about tagging because nothing changed there, but there's tagging infrastructure. You make a report. And here's a list of modules that come out of the box with Autopsy. There's other third-party add-on modules. You'll see some this afternoon, but this is the ones out of the box. There's two on the bottom that are new this past year, so let's go through those. One is the Case UCO report. Who here has heard of Case UCO? Wow. There's a talk this afternoon on Case UCO to learn more about it. This is basically an effort to standardize how forensics data can be stored. I'm probably butchering this, but you can go to the talk afterwards. But the basic idea is, I'm using the wrong terminology here, but you can make a JSON file that everyone knows how to parse and put your forensic results into. There's more to it than that, but that's the basic idea. There's now a Case UCO module. I believe I heard we were the first ones to actually make a Case UCO module. So we make this now. It's basically a manifest of every file on the drive. So when you make this, we go through every file on the drive. We make kind of a JSON record for that you can then import in other tools. And kind of the idea is make it easy to share data between tools. Instead of having all tools have their own kind of proprietary formats and everyone having their own scraping algorithm to parse this tool's HTML or that tool's XML, this kind of a standardized format makes it easier to move data around as part of that. So there's a talk this afternoon in the Autopsy track with MITRE and Basis talking about that integration and what case UCO is in our module for that. There's more coming this year. On our roadmap, we have a bunch more case UCO things coming with like the portable case, which we'll talk about in a second, as well as some REST APIs and some other things. So portable case, as I just mentioned now, is the other kind of new reporting feature for this past year. It's the same name as other tools kind of have. The basic idea is making a subset of data from your current case into a smaller case that you can then kind of share around. So the basic use case right now is your tagged files or files that were marked as interesting, which is our generic way of allowing modules to mark things up. You can basically make a report, say I want these tagged files, these interesting files. It makes kind of a new Autopsy case. So it's basically the same exact Autopsy-looking case. It's a folder, SQLite database inside there. All the files of relevance are copied into that. It's self-contained. It's all relative paths. You can move it around, do whatever you want to. You can run ingest on it. It is now a real, just small case. You can rerun ingest modules. You can tag. You can report. Anyone who has that file is basically just a small, subset of what you had in the original case. It's pretty cool. You can compress it and split and chunk it up. So if you need to transmit it from some slow place or put it on DVDs or whatever, you can chunk it up and compress it, break it into DVD-sized chunks or whatever you want to, burn them, get them however you want to out of there. The basic idea is, make it easy to transfer stuff. If you need support for someone else and share that with them, if you have review agents, you want to give them a subset, it basically works for that use case. All right, so that's kind of the changes in kind of the usual workflow. And then we have some kind of randomish stuff that don't really fit in my nice little model here of working this new kind of number of workflows. So command line. You can now run Autopsy fully from a command line. As I was talking to someone before, this is kind of like a full 360. We've kind of gone from like, command line SwiftKit tools to kind of UI stuff, and now we've gone to like, command line on Autopsy. So from the command line, you can make a case, you can add data sources, you can run ingest modules, you can generate reports. You can do them all at the same time, you can do them individually, we don't really care. There's just different commands that you provide for that. So here's an example, autopsy64.exe. If you're going to make a case, you give the -create case arguments, give it a case name in the root folder for that. You want to add a data source, give it a path to the data source, run ingest, specify ingest, make reports, specify the reports. The basic idea in the current version of this, the current version that was released this past weekend, you pre-configure what ingest modules and report modules you want to run. So you basically log in before and say, I care about recent activity, web activity, EXIF, hashing, keyword searching, whatever. You kind of pre-configure that. In future versions, we'll have much more configurability of things like what we call configuration names. So you can have different settings or names for ingest properties. But right now, it's kind of pre-configured for that. The main motivation for all of this is kind of, cloud, right? It's kind of automation in the cloud, pushing stuff up, firing up VMs, running analysis on these things, creating cases, shutting back down again, but basically be able to automate this in a way a bit differently than we currently do with our auto ingest feature. So our auto ingest feature is basically, we have it in a multi-user setup. It scans folders 24/7 looking for new data, brings them back in, analyzes them. This cloud approach is much more of a, VMs can come up and down as we need them. Linux and Mac. So I think last year we were talking about how we had Linux and Mac support finally for Autopsy. We kind of figured all the kinks out. And then lo and behold, it broke. Because Oracle decided to change their JDK Java licensing things, and all distributions stopped working with Oracle Java. And so for a while, we had no real support because we hadn't figured out how to use OpenJDK, which is kind of a variation on this. So it's all in there now. It's better documented. It's repackaged. So the new version now, will work with OpenJDK and things on there. It's just more complicated. Is basically what this comes down to now with Oracle kind of leaving the scene for the free open source things. So before it was, go to this site, install this Debian package, you're good. Now it's like, go to this website, enter your distribution here, enter your version here, download this, download that, this one. It works. It's just a bit more tedious, but it works. There's a forum now. We always had a forum. It was kind of lagging though. Discourse donated. There's a sentence that was lost there. I think it was supposed to say thanks. But Discourse is a commercial forum site. They are donating their services to open source efforts. So we now have a forum set up. So we thank them for that. There's a lot of activity. I personally am terrible at forums, but other people love forums. So it's great. There's a lot more questions. So go there, ask questions. There's some basic staff there who are checking it. Other community folks are answering questions. It's a great place to get your questions answered. What's coming? We're running out of time here. There's a new search and discovery UI. It should be out in the next release, I think. We're pretty excited about this. The basic, and it'll change names 5 more times. This is why it's a generic name right now. The basic idea that we're trying to get, though, is how do we bubble up the most relevant information to you guys as soon as possible? And we're doing things like leveraging a central repository to show you this file is rare, this file is common, this file is big or small, adding a bunch more filtering, but kind of bubbling things up to make it easier and faster to find the relevant files. More mobile stuff. We're doing a drone thing actually as well. So as part of our work with DHS S&T, they have a big effort on actually learning how to acquire data from drones. So they have a group out in Colorado, I think, who's trying to figure out ways of getting data off drones. We're going to make parsing modules for them. So there'll be some drone parsing modules in there next year. Focusing on keyword search, that's currently our bottleneck in the whole process. So we're looking at improving the performance of our Solar integration. Mentioned before, REST APIs are coming. APFS, we talked about last year. Black Bag donated their APFS version that they built on SleuthKit. They submitted a pull request for it this past year. Ann's been working the past 3 months on kind of on the side of merging that in. There's some fairly significant changes that this comes along with, this notion of pools and things, and we're trying to build this out so we can use the same infrastructure for RAID reconstruction and logical disk management. So we're kind of working that through right now and what database schemas that involves. But that should be in by the end of December in there, so we'll have APFS and maybe LDM, but that's currently say the path for more of these kind of disk management infrastructure. For that, update Project Vic integration. Who knows Project Vic? Most people heard of it. Rich Brown's over there. Talk to him. He's the Project Vic man. As part of our efforts with this, we're going to update our support. We haven't touched it in probably 3 or 4 years. We'll now make it able so you can tag images and have it get pushed back into the cloud for Project Vic and do its various things. Online training, also as part of our DHS work. End of this year, we'll have this pushed out. We're going to have basically our 1-day course in video form. You can do it online regardless of where you are. It'll be free for law enforcement for the first year. Maybe years after that too, but at least for this year, for the first year, it's going to be free for law enforcement. Again, this is all through DHS S&T to push that out to make more training available. We need your support. I'm down to 2 minutes here. All of this, nearly everything that's built here is kind of built through kind of support from other organizations who basically need some capability. We build it for them, and many times we get to push it back out as open source, and you guys all get to benefit from this, of all the stuff that's released out there. We think it's great. But it's always good if we can go back to them and point to, like, these are success stories, and this is why it was good for you to fund this. So if you're law enforcement especially, let us know of what you've kind of needed, what you're using it for, how you're using it, and that helps us to go back to places like DHS and actually say, you should keep on funding this because groups are finding the timeline, for example, is a common one that we have a lot of success stories with, our image gallery or whatever, communications, this is good. We're helping people on the front lines and doing all that stuff. So email me, contact me, whatever, and it'd be good to have some kind of names and stories that we can kind of share along with that. Final slide. You can get the latest version from autopsy.com, or you can also stop by our intro talk a bit later on. We'll dive into some more details of this. If you want updates, we have an email list you can sign up for so you can get updates on when there's new versions. You can follow me on Twitter when I actually tweet. And we actually provide support as well. If you're a lab who wants to have kind of a commercial backing behind something versus the community forums, we provide that as well. There's contact info, again, for kind of interest, stories, questions, whatever. LinkedIn, Twitter, you can probably also find me. And I am terrible at Twitter and LinkedIn, so I will probably not reply for a while. Email is much more reliable. Questions?
Your portable case format, the report that you generate,
yep.
Does it bundle autopsy with it as well? Like a little offline version of autopsy?
So the question was if the portable case includes autopsy. So it doesn't. The portable case is just the case folder, SQLite database of the subset of data and the files itself. So you need kind of to install autopsy separately but then you just kind of use normal case opening. What is the backend? So the correlation engine has two options for backend. One is SQLite. So if you're solo person kind of running small on a desktop, you can set up SQLite for that. Or you can use Postgres, which is the same database we use for multi-user cases on there. So, thanks.